the remaining people to come in. Erin, maybe you can allow my screen to be shared in the meantime.
Yep, I can do. Yeah, just 1 second.
Welcome everybody. We're getting up to 50 people here. Big numbers.
Liv, if you're on this call, can you make Willem a co-host?
Yeah, you're the host now.
There we go.
Welcome everybody to the SBC digital session. It's 1 minute after 4. Waiting for the last participants to get in. We have Valentina logging in now. Welcome Valentina. Mr. Weischer. Everybody's coming in. Welcome.
So Willem, you should be able to share your screen now.
Yes, we're 56 participants. Feel like an auction master.
I was going to say, just before we start, I can do like a little bit of housekeeping if you want. So
yeah, please go ahead, Erin.
What we found last time that worked really well, so we've got a presentation for the first half of the networking session. So if you have any questions for the speakers, do pop them in the chat function and we'll get to them after. And if it's for a specific speaker as well, just let us know that it's for that person. The other thing as well is feel free to share your networking details in the chat. So I usually put my email and my LinkedIn. Just kind of helps you connect with other people. The other thing is a recording of the session will also be available as well. So drop me an email if you want that. But try to keep your microphones off if you're not speaking. Obviously, speakers keep them on. But other than that, it's fairly straightforward. Just enjoy it.
Thank you, Erin. When will the video be available, Erin?
I'm actually converting the Holland one at the minute. So I'm waiting for that to process so we can do it later today and you should be able to send those out to people.
Fantastic. Fantastic. We are 2 minutes past 4. We'll wait another 30 seconds as many people have been entering the room the last minute, 67, 68. Coming in by the droves. In the meantime, please feel free to share your contact details in the chat. And this is also where the questions can be added later. Did you hear from Martin Jörg?
No, not yet.
I did not. I will kick off. He is not the first speaker. So 3 minutes past 4. And at 70, that's a nice number, 70 attendees here. Welcome, welcome. You've tuned into the Gaming in Germany session, preparing for a fully regulated online market at the SBC Digital Summit. We're very grateful for SBC Events for having us. I am, by the way, logging in from Barcelona, the city where the SBC Summit originally would have taken place. Hopefully we will be able to do this and meet face to face next year. Gaming in Germany is the leading business community for everyone who is interested or professionally involved in the German online gambling market. We organize an annual conference coming up soon, publish regular newsletters and print magazines. And welcome to the new attendees here. Germany's new state treaty on online gambling is expected to come into force July 1st next year, making online gambling fully legal throughout the country for the first time. As a result, we will have much to discuss today. With us here today, we have 3 speakers. I will ask each speaker in turn a series of relevant questions related to his area of expertise. This part of the webinar will be followed by a Q&A after about 30 minutes. All webinar attendees can ask questions through the Zoom chat function. You see the chat button somewhere at the right bottom of your screen. We may not be able to answer all questions, but please feel free to reach out after the event. I will provide you, it's one of the last slides, with our contact details at the end of the webinar. But first, let me introduce today's speakers. With us today we have Jörg Hoffmann, group leader, betting and gaming law practice at Melchers Law Firm in Germany. Martin Lischka, and I hope you should be with us now, Director of Regulatory Affairs at GVC Group in London. And Dr. Bastian Scholz, Senior Policy Officer at the Deutsche Sportwettenverband. Let us start with the first speaker, Jörg. Jörg, welcome to the webinar. How are you? How is the family? How's life?
Oh, so far so good. Well, thanks for asking.
Super pleased that that you're here. Jörg, let's kick off this webinar. We have 5 minutes past the hour. And what is the current status of the proposed transitional regime for future licensed operators? What are the most important provisions? But maybe to start with, you told me earlier today you have some news, so feel free to add that to one of your questions where it is the most relevant.
Yeah, I think most of you all know that there was one state in Germany, one land as we call it, which is a small one, the Saarland in the western part of Germany, still reluctant to sign and approve the circular resolution, which has been drafted and circulated by the state chancellors in Germany. And today we received the information that Saarland obviously agreed on signing this resolution as well. So it should be safe to say that within the next couple of days, it will be officially confirmed that the transitional regime will come into force as expected. The regulators stick with October 15th, and that's the date we can fix as a starting point for the transitional regime. Probably I should tell you what it means. What is the transitional regime in a nutshell? It's not an act of law. It's not an administrative proceeding. It's just sort of an internal guidance or guideline for German regulators how to exercise enforcement against non-licensed operators. It's not even a proceeding, so there will be no application proceeding where you can submit any requests or any letters to be communicated and get answers for your questions. There's no centrally responsible authority available. It's just that you adopt future regulation. Future regulation as laid out in the Interstate Treaty 2021, which should come into force as of July 2021. It's currently been sent to the European Commission for the purpose of notification. The standstill period is about to expire on 19th of September, and it can then be ratified in the German 16 Länder parliaments. That's what the time frame is, and it's supposed way, the path we should go. What does it mean in terms of content? It's adopting future regulation, future requirements. It will be designed to allow non-licensed operators being transferred into a licensing regime, but under certain circumstances. And not everybody would like these circumstances because it's full of massive restrictions. It applies basically to online casino offerings and to online poker. It only has an indirect impact, in my view, to sports betting operators, because for sports betting operators, the license conditions and the license application process has certain priority. Sports betting, the assessment of reliability may play a role later, and an extended scope of betting types that will be tolerated or allowed to be offered, because that will be licensable in the future interstate treaty. Maybe there's some question on those will licensable in the current one. Betting on next goal is one of these examples, but we are concentrating on the online casino market. One thing that is key to know is what we understand as being an online casino will be newly defined under future regulation. Online casinos games will be limited to the bank holder games, the table games, and live casino games. Those like roulette, baccarat, and blackjack. And these will be excluded from the license regime for the private industry, basically because what we can apply for as casino operators is called virtual slot machines. These virtual slot machines are a reduced format of online casino games. It's the same kind of games, but a lot of restrictions will be imposed. I will touch on this later because now we're talking about the generic meaning of that transitional regime. And you will see that there's a lot of implemented regarding player protection, responsible gaming, so limits, database connections, centralized player bearing systems, which will have to be connected to at least after July. Few details, if that is applicable during the transitional regime, will be discussed. Important to know that it expects the industry to comply as of 15th October 2020. If the industry does not comply, there is a threat that they will be excluded from any sort of licensing regime in Germany in the future.
Great. Super complete and extensive answer here. Jörg, continuing on the transitional regime, what are the most important legal and regulatory consequences of the introduction of this transitional regime?
Well, first of all, it's key to note that this regime does not legalize the existing offers, not even during the transitional regime. It's simply sort of in a legal way, it's sort of an internal guidance of regulators against which offers they're going, or which operators they're going to place enforcement, and against whom they will waive enforcement. So it's just a transition. And if operators comply, as far as this will be technically possible, they will be no longer subject of enforcement. The others, of course, could face tightened enforcement in the near future. It will contain, well, a lot of requirements, detailed requirements, which will be subject to guidelines we're expecting to be published very soon from the regulators. We know that they are making some progress in putting these things together. But my personal expectation is there won't be a lot of details provided. This will be more focusing on technical details, telling us what the regulators think is, for the time being, not technically feasible. There will be delays. Everything else will be a step-by-step, case-by-case decision in communicating with the industry. What can you do? There will be stake limits. There will be deposit limits. There will be reduced offers. If you imagine online casino, for instance, no longer autoplay function available, the stakes will be limited to €1 per stake. Exemptions possible, but not during the transitional regime, because there is no authority you can apply to. There is a deposit limit considered to be €1,000, and a few other things that reduce the full format of that casino and put it into a very restricted requirement. And of course, these casino games like bank auto games will be completely excluded. That is things we need to realize. And I guess the authorities are prepared to look after the operators as of day one, meaning 15th of October.
Yeah.
Yeah, please go ahead.
That's quite a long list of requirements there, Jörg. So really, really useful. Moving on to the last question, Jörg. What are your expectations regarding the adaptation of the transitional regime? A lot of requirements, quite difficult to implement overnight. How will these provisions be enforced, in your opinion?
Well, I mean, the expectation of the lawmakers and the regulators is kind of apply or die, because you don't have really an option if you want to be compliant. If you consider the bad actor clause, the hidden bad actor clause, that if you don't comply, you'll be out of the game, and you will lose an existing sports betting license if such has been granted before October 15, just in case. Or you will not get one if you're a multi-channel operator offering sports betting and casinos. And if you're limited to casinos or poker, you will not get a license if you do not comply with these rules. And I think one of the key points to consider is switch off the online casino games as newly defined, like roulette, baccarat, and poker. Make sure that you impose these limits, which are expected as soon as possible. I know that the trade association, the German Online Casino Association, was in close contact with regulators, and they submitted a list with requirements they think which are feasible, but a few things which are not feasible just because they need more time and it makes no sense. And my expectation is that they could convince those mindful regulators who understand the business, well, this is not good. Could also imagine, nobody really considered this, these so-called casino games as ruled out in section 2020C of the Interstate Treaty 21. These can only be offered by licensed casino game offerers in the future. This could be the state by way of a monopoly. This could also be a private operator, but it cannot be offered because it's excluded from the toleration regime, or however you like to call it, from day one as of 15th of October until at least the end of June, if not longer, because it's designed in the first draft we've seen of the transitional regime, but it can take longer. Maybe in the extreme event could be until the new central body will be installed, and this could take 1.5 years more. It's supposed to be in Saxony-Anhalt if they sign the treaty and if they pass it into national law.
So transitional regime with a lot of phases there. Excellent, Jörg. Really insightful and really up-to-date information here. I'm sure we'll have some questions coming up for you later. I'd like to move to the next speaker here, Martin. Martin, welcome from London, I guess. Glad you could make it. How have you been? All good?
Not bad. Apologies for being late. One of the usual technology quirks. But yeah, thanks for having me. And I've been fine. Good to see you and good to see Jörg as well, of course.
Hi, Martin. It's a pleasure.
Hello.
Welcome.
As always.
Welcome.
Mine.
And there's another 80 people in the webinar here. Martin, what is your opinion on the proposed transitional regime for future licensed operators?
Well, I would largely subscribe to what Jörg has already said. I believe that together with the post-July 2021 regulation that will finally allow for all online gambling verticals in Germany, albeit in one way or another, this is indeed a step ahead, because we're yet to see the detailed criteria or detailed requirements that the operators would have to comply with. So if I may, I would reserve, or at least partially reserve, my judgment on the impact. That's just very difficult to foretell. But what is clear is that it will certainly, if approved, and that looks very, very likely at this stage, it will certainly raise the levels of legal and regulatory certainty on the German market. Of course, the key question relates to the timelines and how quickly the individual operators can turn their preparations around. GVC's been very busily working on making sure that we will be in a position to comply with the tolerance policy on day one.
Great, so certainty above all for you. Very concretely, Martin, and we discussed this a few days ago, will your company, GVC, and its brands continue to operate in Germany under the transitional regime as it is currently proposed?
That is certainly the intention of the group. I suppose many people on this webinar will, or at least might know, that GVC is taking part in the sports betting licensing process. We are waiting for the outcome, being confident that if and when the licenses have been finally granted, we will be amongst the licensed operators. And as I've just said, of course, at this stage, we don't know the nitty-gritty detail of the tolerance policy criteria, but we do intend to continue operating in Germany under the transitional regime. So the answer to your question is yes.
So, great. Welcome to Germany then. That was quite a clear. Then the last question to you, Martin. How are you? How is your company, GVC, preparing for the new state gambling treaty that will enter into force on July 1st next year?
Well, as Jörg has already set out, the tolerance policy will, I suppose, give a more flavor on what the future regulation will look like in practical terms, because I suppose we all expect the individual detailed criteria to be modeled around the 2021 state treaty. So of course, the fact that there will be a transitional regime is helping with the preparations. GVC has been involved in the regulatory process leading up to the future regulation all along. I don't mean to sound like a broken record, but we definitely welcome the fact that there will finally be regulation of all verticals. I'm not saying that we're necessarily happy with all the regulatory requirements. But hopefully, once operators are licensed by the German authorities, or even in the run-up to the July 1st deadline or the effective date of the future regulation, there will be some room to have a discussion with the German authorities about interpretation of the individual, at this stage, criteria that will apply under the tolerance policy, and in the future, once the new regulation is or has entered into force, about how the individual requirements and restrictions foreseen in what is currently the draft of the future regulation, how they will be construed, how they will be interpreted, and crucially also how we can go from there. Because at the risk of stating the obvious, I've always been of the view that it's far more productive to be lobbying for sensible changes to any regulation from within, i.e. once the market has been regulated and once the operators have entered that market.
Yeah, so work in progress, and we'll see you then for a long time in Germany, Martin. Very good, very good. Moving on to the next speaker, and in the meantime, there's 74 participants in the room. While you've listened to Jörg's and Martin's answers, please feel free to ask additional questions in the chat. In my computer, it's at the bottom right of my PC. There's a button called chat, and you can start putting your questions there for the Q&A session later. Bastian, welcome to the webinar from Berlin. How are you?
I'm fine. Good afternoon, everyone. Hope you're fine too. Good. Thanks for having me.
And thanks that you could make it at such a short notice.
Yeah.
Bastian, as with other speakers, I have 3 questions to you. First, we've already talked a lot about the planned transitional regime, which is going to get into force in October. However, this will only serve as a bridge, eine Brücke, until the actual new gambling regulation enters the stage. The new Gambling State Treaty, which is scheduled to get into force, as we just discussed, on July 1st. How does your association evaluate this new state treaty? What advantages do you think it offers compared to the previous regulation? And where does your association, the DSWV, see problems and need for optimization?
Yeah. Okay, the DSWV, the German Sports Betting Association, which is indeed the key trade association of the sports betting industry in Germany, we view the new state treaty with quite mixed feelings. It's really is a mixed bag. First, the positive side, we very much welcome the abandonment of the former prohibition policy in the gambling sector in Germany, which has, of course, proven totally ineffective in the digital age. We all experienced that the last couple of years. The new Gambling State Treaty indeed is a first step towards a modern, market-compliant gambling regulation in Germany. That is good. The markets for sports betting, virtual slot machines, and online poker will be opened up permanently for private providers. In addition, we also highly support the creation of a central and professional gambling supervisory authority in Saxony-Anhalt. Similar authorities in the UK or in Denmark, for example, have proven to be very suitable and efficient to regulate the gambling market effectively. And what is also very important, to de-ideologize the field of gambling regulation here in other countries and hopefully in Germany as well. This leads us to the problematic areas of the new state treaty. Our main criticism applies to the numerous restrictive regulations of the new Gambling State Treaty for private online and offline gambling offers, which in our opinion in their entirety call into question the successful channelization of customer demand into the regulated market. I want to name 3 key problems as an example. Firstly, the very narrow permissibility of in-game bets solely on the final result or on the next goal in sports with a low number of goals or points, such as football, for example. So this means relevant live betting markets, such as tennis or basketball, as well as popular live betting forms, such as over-under bets, for example, could no longer be offered. Secondly, the fixed cross-supplier deposit limit of 1,000 euros per customer and month restricts the market completely arbitrarily, in our opinion, and does not contribute to player protection. And thirdly, there is gigantic effort to build no less than 3 government surveillance databases, a limit database, an activity database, and a blocking database. From our point of view, these measures are subject to considerable constitutional concerns and are disproportionate, as gamer protections could be better achieved by milder measures, as we see in other regulation regimes throughout Europe. So we therefore believe that improvements on the Gambling State Treaty will be unavoidable in the coming years, and we expect these improvements to come in a kind of iterative process led by the central regulatory body in Saxony-Anhalt. So I think there will be more changes, more reforms in the next couple of years, and of course there's really some points that can be improved.
Great. Well, there's some serious concerns you raised there, and some possible solutions. But thank you for sharing these detailed concerns with you, Bastiaan. On the second question, Bastiaan, for the new Gambling State Treaty to come into force on July 1st, as planned, it must first be ratified by the German federal states. Can you tell us more about this ratification process? Has it already begun? And how great is the danger that the ratification could fail, as happened with former state treaty drafts?
Yeah, as you might all know, Germany is of course a federal state, and gambling policy in Germany is the responsibility of the federal states alone. This means that theoretically each of all the 16 German federal states could pursue an independent gambling policy. But of course, as you know, the federal states have for many years now agreed on a largely uniform nationwide gambling regulation in the form of a state treaty concluded between the states. These state treaties are negotiated by the 16 state governments, but now must be ratified by all 16 state parliaments to come into force. The critical phase of the ratification has not yet begun because of the standstill period still running in connection with the notification of the state treaty to the European Commission. But this standstill period ends on September 19th, so in 10 days. Subsequently, parliamentary procedures will begin very quickly afterwards. The state treaty stipulates that at least 13 ratification documents must be submitted by March 31st next year, so that the state treaty can come into force on July 1st next year. So you see the time frame for the parliamentary procedures up to March 31st is just about 6 months, and this is of course an extremely tight time frame. So what Willem shows you now is a new website launched by the German Sports Betting Association together with the German Online Casino Association. You see there a visual presentation of the ratification process. And I think Willem will share the link with you after the webinar with you as well. The map shows that in several federal states, initial briefings on the new state treaty have already been given to the parliaments, but that the actual parliamentary procedures for ratification have not yet begun. If you visit this website in the coming weeks and months, you see how the process is progressing in all 16 countries. And it is necessary for ratification that at least 13 of these 16 countries agree with the new state treaty. So we already know that many state parliaments are planning extensive stakeholder hearings, and our association will join these hearings too. But nevertheless, we assume that the ratification process will be successful and will run smoothly in the vast majority of the 16 federal states. Having said that, we are currently concerned about 2 federal states in particular, Saarland and Saxony-Anhalt. In both states, Social Democrats are minority partners in a conservatively led coalition, and in both states, Social Democrats have expressed resistance against the state treaty. So if the Saarland, the small country in the very southwest of Germany, in fact denies to ratify the state treaty, this would of course be regrettable, but at least it would not cause the state treaty to fail, since it could also come into force in the other 15 states if necessary. The situation in Saxony-Anhalt, which is the green country in the northern east of Germany, yeah, you see it there. There the situation is quite worrying at the moment. There the conservative CDU governs together with Social Democrats and the Green Party, and both minor coalition partners are currently leaving it open whether they will ratify the state treaty or not. However, since Saxony-Anhalt is to become the location of the central regulatory body, ratification of Saxony-Anhalt is essential. Otherwise, the state treaty will fail. So you see, this is a problem. The political situation in Saxony-Anhalt is complicated. The coalition's cooperation in general is very conflict-ridden, even besides the gambling subject. And the Social Democrats are using their current opposition to the gambling state treaty as a kind of bargaining chip to force concessions from the CDU in a completely different policy area, in brackets, media policy. So we as an association are currently holding many talks at the political level in Saxony-Anhalt in order to obtain the approval of the state treaty by the parliament there. So finally, in the end, there is, in our perspective, reason for optimism that current political obstacles can be overcome. But of course, the coming month will be undoubtedly very exciting, to say the least. And the next couple of months will be very busy for us when it comes to lobbying measures, especially in Saxony-Anhalt.
Yeah, that's quite clear. That's very useful to have the map there. I've just shared the URL of that website in the chat. You can pick it up from there. If you go to the chat window of Zoom, I've dropped the URL of that. Bastian, the final question is about the German sports betting licenses that still have not been granted. The sports betting licenses procedure, which began January 1st of this year, has once again been stopped by a court ruling back in April. What is your association's assessment of this circumstance? And above all, when can we finally expect the granting of these licenses?
Yes, I think that's the $1 million question, or the multi-million dollar question. And I'm afraid that I cannot give you a satisfying answer to this question too. As things stand, it is still completely unclear when the licensing procedure can be continued. As an association, we regret the suspension of the sports betting licensing procedure by the Administrational Court in Darmstadt in last April. The granting of licenses, which was politically decided for the first time in 2012, so 8 years ago, is once again uncertain. And for sports betting providers, for our members who have again invested considerable effort and money in the application procedure, this situation is simply unacceptable. So we hope that the responsible Hessian Ministry of the Interior can soon succeed in curing the formal errors criticized by the court, and that the licensing procedure can continue. The state of Hesse has appealed against the decision of the Darmstadt court, but the duration of the delay now depends largely on the higher Hessian administrative court, who has to decide on the whole subject. Unfortunately, the Court of Appeal is also responsible for a large number of complaints against restriction during the Corona crisis, which has pushed the sports betting issue to the back of more urgent court cases, unfortunately. But the Hessian government expects that a decision will be made in the course of autumn. We hope so too, but there's no certainty about this either. So we all have to wait and see, unfortunately. That's all we can say about that.
Wait and see, that's what we've heard several times today. That's also what we've heard in other sessions today. But I think, as Martin said before, progress is progress. Thank you, Bastian. So let's move to the audience question. And Bastian, please stick around for the Q&A part. As I mentioned before, listeners and viewers can submit their questions through the Zoom chat function. We've seen already some questions coming in. Let us take a look at these questions. Let me take a look at this question and see what we have here. And give me 10 seconds just to wrap my head around the first one. There's a good 10, 15 questions. Let me browse through. I guess a super obvious one, and it was mentioned quite well by Jörg, but I can also see it does create a lot of confusion from a foreign perspective. Operators, Jörg, operators should move, that's from Davida. Operators should move to €1 slots stake limit and no autoplay by October 15?
That's correct.
That's correct. It's still surprising for a lot of people. Can they offer online poker and roulette and baccarat as October 15? If they follow the guidelines?
We need to distinguish. sorry, we need to distinguish between the products. Poker will be subject to a licensing regime, so that's fine. Online poker is okay. And the slots machine in this format, which they call virtual slot, which is the reduced format, will also be fine. What will be objected is the then newly defined online casinos, which is roulette, baccarat, and blackjack. So I saw some questions saying, is it fine if we offer roulette, baccarat, and blackjack, the bank holder games or the table games? No, this will be excluded. This will be subject to the so-called online casino license, which is really weird because you cannot clearly distinguish between what it means. The usual understanding in various jurisdictions is this is all online casino games. But that's how it is. And this cannot be offered by private operators after, are not allowed to be offered after the 15th of October. That's what we all have to keep in mind. And for the then left virtual slot machines, which is the reduced type of online casinos, there is a lot of restrictions for stakes, for spin duration, other things. This is what we touched upon earlier. This will be expected to be implemented as soon as possible, meaning as soon as technically possible. I'm aware that, of course, there will be some operators who do not care and simply trying to challenge this or trying to offer this. And this is the big obstacle for a solid transfer of an unlicensed environment into a licensed environment, because you risk to lose all your clients, all your customers, if the players want to stake more. I think it was Martin or it was Bastian mentioning that for the limited stakes, that is an issue because it's applicable now. There will be competition, of course, and it's really hard to deal with that. For sports betting operators, there is a suggestion which is not part of the future regulation now, but the transition regulation, but it's decided within the same circular resolution that the exemption, the maximum exemption from stake limit, from stake limit of €1,000 per month should be maximum 30,000 euros per player, but only applicable for 1% of your active player base, calculated on the 3 months period. And then these players should also set the personal limit of a maximum of 20% losses, which is mandatory. So it's reduced to 6,000 euros. If you imagine, this is what our research conducted, if you imagine that it's 80% of the players who do not stake more than 1,000 euro in Germany per month, but this ends up or results to around 20% of the gross gaming revenue. You can imagine how far away from serving the real market this is. So we are risking to lose these players to an illegal or to a non-compliant market.
And we'll get to that in a second. Since we are at product, Jörg, just a quick extension of the product question. The restrictions you mentioned for, and that's a question here from Evelina, the restrictions you mentioned for the product type also in parallel are valid for live streaming product?
Yeah, live casino games or live streaming is limited to this newly defined online casino license, which is more a concession than a license because it's not unlimited available. If you apply for the virtual casino, virtual slot machine license, and you meet the requirements, you will get that license. This is different to the former licensing procedure with sports betting in 2012, where we had a cap of 20 licenses. But for the so-called online casinos, referring to the bank holder games, this is limited to the amount of existing bricks and mortar casinos in Germany. So licenses in Germany. So in Berlin, it would be one single license. The same in Hamburg. In Hesse, it would be 3. In Lower Saxony, it would be maybe 11 or 9. We need to check this. But it's very difficult, and it's tailor-made and adjusted to the existing land-based industry. The amount of license mirrors the amount of existing bricks and mortar casinos, which is the full format table games and slot machines in Germany.
Yeah, last question, Jörg, really useful about product. Question here from Marga. What about games providers? You mentioned a lot of these products now. Do they need a B2B license or specify the games? What is the?
No, it's different to what we experience in the UK. You don't need a license to offer your games as a provider, but your products, of course, the games will be subject to the license application of the operator. So these operators will send a list to the authority, which will then be responsible to approve and to issue the license. That's the same as it happens in Schleswig-Holstein currently, because some of you may know there is an existing licensing regime for casinos, poker, and sports betting in place since 2012, 2013. And you have to submit your list of casino games, probably concerning many providers, and at least the random generated stuff must be certified by a test lab, and you get these every single play, every single game, you get license or included in your license. If not, and you operate a game that is not mentioned in your license, this would be regarded as illegal operation.
Yeah.
But it's something which is quite easily, because many operators are offering the same type of products. So the regulator will be in a position to really approve these things very smoothly, very swiftly.
Yeah, exactly. Since we're on the topic of licensing, Jörg, question from KP here. How much is it going to cost to get a license?
Well, we are now talking about the transitional regime. We are far away from the licensing regime, which comes into force as of July next year. For the traditional regime, that is very important to understand. There is not even a license application system or something similar in place. It's just a formal toleration. And it's not even a toleration that enables you to consider yourself being legally operating. It's just a wave of enforcement. And so far, there will be no licensing correspondence with the ministries or the regional governments and whoever councils will be in charge. Every single land is responsible to apply and to do supervision of the gambling market. I guess that the regulators will split the market, maybe ABC and whatever alphabetical order to this land, to another one, and then you will be subject to supervision and enforcement of a single authority in Germany. And there is no joint competence. They could do so in authorizing maybe a particular authority in Germany, as it is the case with the Darmstadt Regional Council for sports betting operations, which is laid out in the current interstate treaty. But for the time being, no such system is available. That's why my advice is try to get as much expert advice as possible, and then try to interpret these guidelines and to adopt the future regulation, to be compliant. I think they will allow you some time here and there, but nobody is there to guide you through this process from the regulatory perspective. That's at least my take. You do it. If you fail, you will receive a hearing letter. And even then, you can try to comply and change things. Only those who consider to be black market or unlicensed operators in the future, they just continue, but they will be subject of a very tightened enforcement, because the regulators, of course, owe the compliant operators that they protect this business. And another thing, maybe this question comes up, but when we talk about enforcement, advertising will still not be allowed for these tolerated products, because it's still regarded as illegal. Advertising is possible for Schleswig-Holstein licensed products and for sports betting once licenses will be granted, but not for these types of virtual games until first license will be issued and an authority is there that could allow you to advertise. This is a disadvantage against the black market, a massive disadvantage apart from other jurisdictions. So far, I don't like this regulation because it's not really intended to have the market survive. It's more or less a drive, because a ghost drive on the German Autobahn in the opposite direction. But it's the first way opening the doors, and so far we take it.
It's very fast, faster than in other countries, as we all know. The speed limit, I mean. Widening the questions to Bastiaan and Martin. I'm also looking at here for some German help here from Thielemann. Will the Duldungslösung, I can read it, I don't know what it means, allow sports betting until a proper regime is in place?
Yes. Bastiaan, now you're answering, please.
I didn't get the question. Was it if sports betting is allowed under the toleration regime?
if that's what Duldungslösung means, yes.
Yeah, it means toleration regime.
Toleration regime, yes.
Yes, it is. During the toleration regime, you are allowed to offer that betting products that are allowed according to the new state treaty 2021. This might be more than in the recent situation, because at the moment we have the recent state treaty, and this state treaty, for example, says you are not allowed to offer in-game bets at all. So the new treaty allows that, and during the transitional period, you are allowed to do that. But the betting offers during the transitional regime might be less than some of the providers offered during the last couple of years, during the whole situation where they refer to the European right. So this is the difference. So it's more than in recent legal background, in recent legal state treaty, but it's less than some of the providers are used to.
Yeah, if I may, just to add, that's why I mentioned earlier that the transition regime is more focused on the casino and poker space. The online sports betting sector is subject to the licensing regime. If this licensing regime could be continued, the industry is getting the rules and conditions provided by the Regional Council of Darmstadt. Certainly the gaming committee, the Glücksspielkollegium will be involved, although this is highly questioned under constitutional law, whether these have the power to set regulation here. But that is not just a legal question. For sports betting, the Duldungslösung, the toleration regime, does not really apply one-to-one. It's a matter of time, but as you said, Bastian, it's absolutely fair to say those betting types which will definitely not be licensable, like social bets or betting on lotteries or other things which are not sports betting, including horse betting or horse racing. It's well advised, good advice to take them off. I personally would say, if we talk about betting on esports, you find some reasoning in the explanation, in the explanatory notes, that this is subject to development. I would not advise my clients to stop offering esports, because I think this will be licensable in the future. Nothing else would make sense. And if you look cross-border across the European Union, you see these developments.
Okay, that also answered another question about the fantasy sports question. Going to the marketing side here, we have a couple of questions here. From Carol, will affiliates be able to advertise for legal operators under the new regime? I'm assuming she means two questions. She may mean two questions with it: one within the transitional regime, and two after the 1st of July 2021.
Yeah, well, for the transitional regime, unfortunately, it would be advertising for illegal games of chance, because, as I said previously, that is no legalizing of the offers. So regulators would not accept any kind of advertising. Doesn't matter who is going to initiate that sort of advertising. As of 1st of July next year, things are different, because then it would be legal operations, and then the detailed provisions of the interstate treaty will tell you how far you're allowed to advertise, for what products, at what time. There is a watershed, for instance, that goes from 6 o'clock till 9 o'clock daytime in TV. That needs to be considered basically for these online casino games. And there are some rules for affiliates. There are very tight rules for advertising, and for in particular for the remuneration of advertising, because the German government decided not to allow sort of a remuneration that is based on percentage on turnover or whatever. So if it's a fixed fee, maybe fine. These are the details, would go beyond what we can discuss now, but that is quite complicated and a lot. So things will be changing, and the market for the affiliates is designed and intended to be less attractive as in other jurisdictions, unfortunately.
That is quite clear. We still have 2-3 minutes for some last questions, so please feel free to shoot the super relevant questions. I think you have all the experts on board here. Question about, okay, going back to esports, we have a question here about fantasy sports. There was not an esports question, and sorry for confusing that. It's rather daily fantasy sports. Will these be permitted under the new legislation? Looking at all the three experts here. fantasy sport?
I would suggest that that's not clear yet, just like in many other places, with the notable exception, needless to say, of a number of US states.
Yeah.
Fantasy sports remain a mystery in terms of regulation. I suppose my interpretation would be that fantasy sports may not be covered by the future regulation.
I concur with
Fantasy
you,
and
Martin.
mystery goes hand in hand. So that's quite appropriate. So we're sort of getting to the end of this session. If there's one quick relevant question, if not, we have quite a detailed question left, and then we should wrap up that from Chain. Will financial institutions, payment methods, need any sort of certification from a relevant authority in Germany? Looking at all the three panelists, really.
Again, as Jörg's already pointed out, the transitional regime is not your classic or standard licensing regime. It's effectively a set of enforcement criteria. So the operators that will comply with those criteria, they should, I would put it like that, have a guarantee that no enforcement attempts will be undertaken against them. And by implication, that should, again, give the payments providers an increased level of certainty that they can work or even restart working with those operators. So that would be my take, of course. Ultimately, we're talking about Germany, with all due respect to the two Germans on this, on the panel, and there is no absolute certainty. But cut a long story short, this should be one of the main benefits of complying with the tolerance policy, again, brushing aside what the individual criteria might turn out to be at the end.
Yeah, quite clear. Thank you.
I concur with Martin.
Yeah.
I think it's feasible to, or it's fair to say that if these operators comply with this new interim regime, they should be supported and be allowed to be supported by the PSPs. Otherwise, it would make no sense at all. It would not be a transitional regulation. And I think you can say for those casino operators who really adopt this future regulation and be compliant with the requirements of transition regulation, payment service providers should be allowed and will be allowed to transfer the payments between players and these casinos, although formally it is not legally, but this is to be assessed in the context of this interim regulation.
Yeah. Bastian, anything to add to that?
Nothing to add.
Great. I think with this excellent Q&A, 1652, we've come to the end of today's webinar. Thank you. Thank you all for joining us. Thank you, Jörg. Thank you, Bastian. Thank you, Martin, for joining us. Thank you, Emma and Kelly, for having us from the SBC team. Erin, apologies. Again, if we did not get your question during a webinar or you think of any additional questions later, I've added the email addresses of today's participant here on the screen. So feel free to contact us there. Last but not least, we are holding our Berlin event on the 19th of October in Berlin, completely COVID-proof and also in a hybrid form with video in and out. So you're welcome to have a look at that site, gamingingermany.com. And for now, I want to thank all, and I think we were up to 81 participants for joining us. Thank you, SBC. Thank you, speakers, and have a wonderful afternoon.
Thanks for your moderation.
Take care. Bye-bye.
Have a good day. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Thanks, guys. So the bar actually stays open. So I don't know if you want to stick around. You can have conversations and stuff. But thank you so much. It was really interesting.
Great. Yeah, that went smooth.
You're welcome. Thank you. Thanks for having us with you.
Number of questions, Erin.